Hello everyone, my name is Rudo Chifamba and welcome to my YouTube channel where I talk all things projects. So today I am going to be sharing with you my PMP certification journey. So that's a quick summary, or maybe a relatively quick summary of how I got my PMP certification. So the application process, prepping for the exam itself, and then life after certification. So let's start right at the beginning with the application process. The application process was relatively simple. Now this was 9 years ago, so big disclaimer, I'm not going to be able to remember everything. And again, if you're using this to kind of like get a sense of what your own experience might look like, then that's a good thing. But if you want it to be like for like, it probably won't, because PMP has obviously changed certain things by now. So just want you guys to be aware of that before I dive into what my experience was like. So applying for the certification was pretty straightforward. A link on the PMI page where you apply for eligibility to take the exam. So I had to dig back through emails to see what my process was like. I applied for the credential application around June of 2013, and it took about a week before PMI got back to me and said, yes, your application has been accepted. Now you can pay and then schedule your exam. So I was now eligible to take the exam, and immediately once they accept your application, it kicked in what they call the exam eligibility period, which was a year, probably still is, from the time when your application is accepted to the time when you can take the exam. And I'm presuming, I didn't let that year lapse, but I'm presuming if you do, then you have to start all over again. So got that, and then I really dilly-dallied before I scheduled my exam. And PMI just periodically sent reminders like, hey, complete your PMP application process. Eventually, I got around to it around mid-October was when I did my payment, and I obviously I scheduled my exam for 2 months out. So from that point onwards, and I started preparing for the exam itself. So that was probably the fun part. Exam prep for me was really all entirely self-study. I just did it, me, myself, and I got a copy of the PMBOK 5th edition. I still remember, I still actually have it on my Kindle in my library. And I just read through that. I had read through the PMBOK for my master's, so it wasn't uncharted territory necessarily. But because PMI certifies on a given edition, I could not use the 4th edition, which I did my master's on. And so I got the 5th edition on my Kindle, read through that, got several PMP exam prep question books, like books that just have exam prep, hundreds and hundreds of exam prep questions, and worked through those. And it was a good process. I have to say, the thing that took me aback a little, this was when I took my first practice exam. So I feel like, yes, I think I'm ready. I think, I'll ace this exam. And I took that first prep exam, and I did quite dismally. And, you feel a little bit discouraged. And then what I figured out is I hadn't gotten into the head of the PMI, because the way that certain questions are asked is, you are faced with this problem, what is the first thing that you would do, or what is the most important thing that you would do? So they ask their questions in a particular way, so you have to be cognizant of that and answer appropriately. So once I kind of like understood how they asked their questions, I took another set of exam prep questions, and that went well, and then took another set. I don't know how many sets I took really, but I took enough that I started to feel confident and comfortable about my grasp of the questioning process as well as the content, obviously. So that was exam prep for me. Pretty much, like I said, I did not attend study groups. I did not attend courses or anything like that. It was just me, my PMBOK, and my exam questions and the work experience that I had. So that's what preparation looked like for me. Right, so on to the exam day itself. I actually took my exam in person at a projectmetrics center. So drove into a place, sat in front of a computer and took the exam. And if I recall, this was 200 questions in 4 hours or something like that. And it was really a race against time from start to finish for me. I'm not one of those people who like do a 4-hour exam in 3 hours and then sit and wait for the clock to run out. If at all I had time at the end, it was probably maybe 10 or 15 minutes. And I basically just worked through, answered the questions that I was really clear about, and noted the questions that I was not, to go back and then, work a little bit more on those and fine-tune answers, or if I couldn't, just make the best guess and move on. So I think that was definitely an option, that you could go back to certain questions and fix them. But again, like I said, it's been 9 years, and so I could be mixing my facts here. So after the exam time had lapsed, basically sat there waiting for the result. You got your result pretty much immediately or soon after, and for sure my result came out and I passed. And of the domains that they examined, I actually got the highest ranking on all of those. So back then, I think the rankings were proficient, moderately proficient, and below proficiency. So I got proficient, which made me really proud. I was very happy with the result, and I felt like it was an endorsement on my study, my study pattern, or my prep pattern. And so that was that, and basically got an email as well just confirming that result and saying that I was going to get my certificate in the mail in several days or weeks at that time. So probably would have been weeks to ship from wherever they ship from, which I'm presuming might be the US to South Africa. But that did arrive, and that, the rest, as they say, is history. That's how I got my certification. The very last bit that I want to share with you guys is life after certification, which is the real work of certification, in my opinion. But before I do that, I just want to give you guys a few tips which I consider maybe useful for you if you want to get certified. The first one is make sure you are preparing for the exam on the right edition of the PMBOK. In my case, when I took the exam, PMP was examining off of the 5th edition, and I had a copy of the 4th edition, which I was using for my master's degree, but then I couldn't use that because, the exam was on the 5th edition. And that's something that you really need to be cognizant of, because the project management body of knowledge is constantly evolving, and if they base questions on a certain edition and you study on a different edition, obviously a prior edition, then there's going to be a mismatch there, and very likely not going to be a happy mismatch. So make sure that you are aligned in terms of which edition you're being examined on and which edition you are prepping on. Then the next thing I would recommend is do practice questions. So as I mentioned, I had a rude awakening with my first attempt at practice questions. That went really badly, but it was a great investment, because once I got familiar with the way that PMI asks questions, once I also got more comfortable and confident with the questions themselves and kind of bringing the subject matter, to coalesce with the questions. It was so useful. I walked into that exam room a lot more confident than if I hadn't done the practice questions. So do those practice questions. And then the last bit is find a way of prepping for the exam that suits you and how you learn best. For me, I'm a learner. When I learn, most of the time I just kind of like want to get intimate with the content, and it worked excellently for me. But some people might find study groups useful. Some people might find just going on that course to just have somebody frame the content for them more useful. So find whatever way works for you. No way is better than the other, but there is one way that works best for you. So find what that is and just work with that. And so those would be my tips in terms of preparing for the exam. And then life after certification. And this is it, and just to give context by what I mean by life after certification is, in order for you to maintain your PMP credential, you have to keep it alive. It renews every 3 years, which means every 3 years you have to meet the requirement for that renewal, which is meeting a minimum of 60 PDUs, professional development units. And how that works out is usually a PDU works out to about an hour of learning or some kind of engagement with the project management space. And in my case, I've been through 2 full certification cycles, and I'm right at the tail end of my last certification cycle. And that is so useful. That whole process of renewing of learning with the intention of renewing your certification is useful, not just so that you maintain a credential, but the learning process does a lot for you, because like I mentioned, the body of knowledge is constantly evolving. Some parts of it evolve faster than others, but just staying abreast of what's happening within project management has been super useful for me. So highly recommend that you do it, not just for the end or as a means to an end, but as, you know, like a process of learning and growing and evolving as a professional yourself. So that's what I had to share today, guys. Hope that this helps somebody just be able to take some tips of what worked in my experience, toss out what would not work in your experience, and all the best on your certification journey. Till next video, goodbye and do take care.